This video was originally recorded February 2015 at Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa in Phoenicia, New York. To learn more about Menla Retreat, please visit their website at menla.us.
Hello, everybody. Sorry. I had a craving for banana. So Nina, we understand that we were to be talking kind of this is Valentine's Day, right?
Tomorrow.
Well, so we're supposed to be talking about love, right? Yep. And what it is. And I think Nina, you should tell them something about it.
No, I think you should start.
You do? Okay. Well, I guess our qualification is not only that Menla has a little bit of a Buddhist flavor. What?
That's it.
Oh yeah. Menla has a little bit of a Buddhist flavor. Although it's not sectarian in any way, but we do have his whole Dalai Lama and some things. We have like Jesus over here too. And Tara, and but also we'll be celebrating this summer our 48th anniversary. Krishna's there too. Our 48th anniversary, so somehow we survived for a while. And usually she makes me do the talking.
I never talk.
Oh, that's not true. Well, you were always teaching me something, then you expect me
in private.
Oh. Okay. Love is defined in Buddhism. The word is called Maitri. And which relates to two words in Sanskrit, Mata, which is mother, and Mitra, which is friend. And so Maitri, and in Pali, those of you who know some have like bumped into like some Vipassana things, they talk about metta, which is this Pali word. Because Pali language, they don't like consonant clusters. So they simplify Maitri to metta. And it's translated often as loving kindness. But it really is just love. The reason in English translations, they use the word loving kindness is that they heard about love from Christian missionaries and colonialists in Asia, and then they didn't think they were too loving to them, so they wanted to put in the kindness part, for which you can't blame them, I think. And so it is love, and it's defined as the wish for the happiness of the beloved. So in our Western terminology, it's more agape than eros, if you know a little bit that say. It's more altruistic or selfless love than it is necessarily erotic desire. But in India in general, and the compassion fits with it in that compassion means the will to relieve others' suffering. So love is the will to have to their happiness, the happiness of others, and compassion is the will to remove their suffering. So compassion is not simply empathy, it's not just feeling their suffering, although maybe it's based on that, but it goes along with the wish to have them be free of that suffering and a kind of a impulse toward them to help them be free of that suffering. Compassion does. And therefore love also has the will to make them happy, have them be happy. So I'm having I like to add to that, which people don't usually do when they do it, that in other words, to actually really love and to actually therefore really be compassionate, a person has to have some happiness themselves. They have to already have some kind of bliss or happiness, some sort of capacity for that. Because how would you want another person to feel happy if you don't know what feeling happy means? And then, if you want to help them free themselves from suffering, if you don't have a feeling of what freedom from suffering would be like, how would you really? You would be sympathetic to someone. Oh, I'm sorry you're suffering, but you would be sort of subliminally assuming that there's no way of changing that. If you follow me. In Buddhism, this is called, there's a psychological thing where all emotional feelings like that toward others connect to a level of understanding, or they would put it a level of wisdom. So compassion, they have a notion that the notion of I don't like it that you're suffering, combined with ignorance, what they call ignorance, misknowledge, is actually not true compassion. Sometimes they can call it sentimental compassion or conceptual compassion, but it has no power, no strength to help another. It's just like a pity kind of thing, like, I'm sorry for your state, but you're just stuck with it. I have no idea. Nothing can be done about it, if you follow that. Does that make sense?
Because they don't know.
What?
Because they don't know it, they don't have that experience of it.
Well, yeah, or also because they have the ignorance means that, in the Buddhist sense, ignorance means that you think of things as being fixed in the state that you perceive them as being in. It means your mind sort of, it's like however you see it, you think that's what it is. You haven't had a kind of experience that things are never quite what they seem to be. So therefore, when you see someone in pain, you think that's just what they are.
Unless you experience that pain.
Unless you experience it, but unless you realize that there may be some other capacity in them other than the pain. You follow me? It's like a doctor. A doctor who only is focused on the sicknesses. Mm-hmm. People come to them and they say, oh, here comes the tuberculosis. Oh, here comes the cancer. Oh, here comes a neurosis, high blood pressure. They don't say, here comes a marvelous human being with incredible sensitivities and capacities for blooming energy, who is afflicted with something that is preventing them from being their real self. In other words, a doctor who sees the potential health in the patient is very different from a doctor who can only see the sickness, if you follow me.
I do.
How does this relate to
what?
How does this relate to the ability to truly understand where someone's coming from, even if that's totally against your own belief? That relatability.
Well, understand where they're coming from. That's again, I think to understand where anybody else is coming from means you have to understand where you're coming from. I think, and that's why they say it goes along with a certain level of wisdom. And for example, the first level of wisdom they usually connect to a knowledge of impermanence, meaning the constant changeability of everything. So in other words, then when you feel the suffering of another, you also feel the potential of their being free of that suffering. So then your will to their freedom from it seems to have a target. You know what I mean? You feel that you can free them from suffering, or they can be free of that suffering. Similarly, if love is wishing them to be happy, you see them potentially free of the suffering and see them potentially happy. And actually, they have a concept that love, we have that concept in our popular culture. They say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So that means someone is gaga in love with somebody else, and then that person looks really beautiful to them, and not necessarily to someone else. So, and the Buddhists agree with that, and they say that when you even imagine another person as happy, they look beautiful to you. Mm. So in other words, when you love them, you sort of see that beauty that's in there, and although maybe they're grimacing with the pain or there's a problem, so you see that, and underneath that there is a potential happiness, a potential beauty about that, something like that. So anyway, the thing about marriage advice, Buddhists are not good about that in general. There's this wonderful story about the great...
Rats.
But they don't perform marriages, for example. Buddhist monks do not. And Buddha was very careful in forming his order, his community, of people seeking freedom and enlightenment, that they did not infringe on priestly livelihood roles. So he told his mendicants, we call them monks now, but they weren't really monks, they were mendicants. Bhikshu means a mendicant, someone who lives on alms, others feed them. Right. They go and ask for lunch. It's based on the free lunch. The Buddhist community was based on the idea of free lunch, which is why it could only happen in a rich country like India in those days. the richest of the Eurasian communities were the Indian ones. And because of tremendous agricultural wealth there in those river valleys. And there's a famous story in Tibet, Atisha, who was a Bengali and a really great master. I mean, he taught one marvelous things, wrote great books, and he had a huge impact in Tibet in the 11th century. And the kings of Tibet and queens who had invited him were pestering him, and the nobles there and others, about advice for their marriages. They wanted his advice, and he kept saying, I don't give that advice. I'm a monastic, I'm a mendicant, I'm a celibate. So I don't really know about these issues, and I don't give such advice. And they kept pestering and pestering. So finally he said, all right, you want some marriage counseling, couples therapy? They said, yes, we want that. He was a very enlightened person. So he said, okay, here it is. Husband and wife, each of them will soon be dead. Therefore, while still alive, they should be more kind to each other. Which I think that's a very Buddhist thing, in the sense that in Buddhism, being aware of death, having death as a witness or having death as an advisor, like Don Juan in the Carlos Castaneda books used to say, take death as your advisor, makes you much more alive, of course, because you realize you are alive and you're not dead yet, and you should therefore, live the moments to the fullest, make the best of them, and this kind of thing. You know what I mean? Which I think is really, I love that actually myself. I think that's the best method in life. He didn't, other than that, I don't know what else he elaborated. Except, but I know, the other thing is that Buddha himself and the whole Buddhist teaching was based on Buddha's discovery that happiness is a natural state of beings. Actually, this is very confusing for people because people think, well, Buddhism is based on everything is suffering. Because the first noble truth is suffering, truth of suffering. But that's the misunderstanding that is around there, So the thing is, Buddha's discovery was not suffering. It doesn't take a Buddha to discover suffering. We all easily can discover it. And we do all the time. What Buddha discovered was that the reality of life, if you really understood where your expectation of where you're coming from or where anyone is coming from, anyone who really understood it, according to Buddha, who claimed to have really understood it, is that life is bliss, actually. Life is nirvana, the third noble truth. In the four noble truths, do you all know the four noble truths? No? You're not looking eager, but maybe
You asked me to
Okay, Greg, do you know the four noble truths?
There is suffering.
Suffering first. But it's key, the unenlightened life is suffering. Not that all life is suffering, unenlightened suffering. He was looking at some people, 4 or 5 people who hadn't had a square meal in 5 years, they hadn't shaved, they hadn't washed, they hadn't eaten, they were really in bad shape. He looked at them and he said, this is suffering. Again, a very common sense statement to that group. So the unenlightened life is suffering, but he elaborated, it was clear. The ignorance dominated life, the misunderstanding dominated life. Second one is the cause of the suffering, the origination of the suffering. Third one is the freedom from the suffering, nirvana. And the fourth one is the path to the freedom, what's called the Noble Eightfold Path, right? And so it's a medical diagnosis. He's not, the medical diagnosis is not, unless it's a really bad prognosis, the medical diagnosis is not that the recognition of the symptom is not the fact. That's just dealing with the problem. It's noticing there is a problem. Then the diagnosis is to analyze the cause of the problem. And the prognosis is the key thing. Can there be a cure? And Buddha's discovery was the prognosis. That the reality of life is the freedom from suffering. Because of those four noble truths, the only one that is real reality, in Buddhism there's two realities. There's real reality and unreal reality. An unreal reality means a reality that is somewhat real, but it's never quite what it seems to be. Like an illusory, not illusion completely, but an illusory reality. Like when you look at yourself in the mirror and you look in the mirror and you see a three-dimensional space in the mirror, what you see is a reality. You're seeing a reflection of a three-dimensional space, but it looks like the three-dimensional space is in there. And of course it isn't. So in that sense, it's unreal. That aspect of it is unreal. So that's unreal reality, if you follow me. So the ignorance-dominated perception is one that sees things in a slightly distorted way, like looking in a mirror. And therefore, but nirvana is what really is, and if what you understand, that's how you see everything as nirvana. And then he lets some people think that nirvana was some other place. You know, like you leave this world and you go to another place. But he himself basically clearly stated that that's not what he meant. He let them think that because they think that it would be impossible for this to really be bliss. The reality of this to be bliss, because there's too much suffering in our normal perception of things, you know. So people wouldn't believe that. So he let those kind of people, but some people can get it. The other thing, which is that if you experience this world as it really is, you will feel blissful yourself. Some people can't get that. But for those, he talked what's called non-duality, which means that the reality of this is what it really is, and then when you see it wrongly, you manage to suffer in the midst of bliss. You manage to turn that bliss into suffering through your ignorance, if you follow me. Now, the ignorance itself is defined. This has everything to do with couples. The ignorance itself is defined as the perception of yourself as being some sort of absolute, and feeling that you are a real reality, not an unreal reality. And therefore, when you think you're the real reality, you're put in a position of automatic conflict with the rest of the world. Because the other people don't think you're the real reality, they think they're the real reality. So you're all in a disagreement with the world, and the world is a lot bigger than you. And hey, world, I'm the real reality, and they forget you, you're just whatever. And each of us is the real reality. Then you have, under stressful circumstances, you have the Hobbesian, war of all against all, what they call, which is the cause of all the trouble. So that's ignorance. That's the cause of the suffering, the distorted, the exaggeration of the sense of self. And then they have a greater subtlety about it. It's also an exaggeration of the sense of the self of other things. In other words, thinking that other things are really themselves some sort of absolute different thing than you. So there's like a self of things there, an objective self of it. So what enlightenment is not an experience that you don't exist at all. That's another way it's misunderstood. You think that the big goal of enlightenment is to just disappear, And then people in the modern world, people wonder why that's such a big deal. They automatically do this, just shoot themselves. You don't have to go to a Zen center for 30 years. Just shoot yourself when you disappear. They think that they don't have the idea of the continuity of life. Modern people don't. But although the Buddha did, and modern people should actually, that's another topic. But the point is, in the state of couples, if each one of the couple thinks they're the main thing of the couple, it's not going to work out well, obviously, because they're going to disagree with each other at a root level. And temporarily, there's kind of that thing where they fall in love, and each one tells the other and maybe feels, oh, you're the greatest thing. And then each one, at some level, is really amazed that I've been going on all this time, and ever since Mom, nobody thought I was the greatest except me. And now somebody agrees with me. Wow. And when each one agrees with the other, it's really a flip out. And that's why Romeo and Juliet, everybody else hates them. Because they're both agreeing with each other in their mutual narcissism. They're fitting together temporarily. But that unfortunately doesn't last. Just like Mom thought you were the greatest for a while when she brought you out of herself. And then after a while, she gets tired of mother's gold, and it's like
30 years later.
And then sooner or later, she said, she still loves you, but it never loses that, luckily. But it doesn't really last at the same degree. So the key, therefore, is that, and from the Buddhist point of view, psychologically, not religious, but psychologically, and Buddhism is is more science and psychology in a way, really, and philosophy than it is really religion. That's another long story for our context. But in that context, all of the great spiritual teachings of humanity that have lasted have basically helped people diminish that sense of I'm the greatest. Whether they did it under theism, they sort of say, well, you're not so great, God is great. Love the Lord with all thy heart and love thy neighbor as thyself. You know what I mean? They have like all this kind of commandments. Confucius also, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He had a golden rule like that. And every single teaching has that kind of aspect. You know, Islam, if it wasn't corrupted by the Wahhabi people lately in Saudi Arabia, Islam means surrender, actually. Your ego, Islam means salam, peace, surrender, comes from that. Salam means, salam alaikum, peace be with you. But the salam part is like a salam, it's a bow, means I surrender to you, that means. And therefore we have peace, right? So because we're not competing, we're not fighting. That's what it's supposed to mean, That's what it was in its initial vision of Muhammad, And it wasn't killed an unbeliever at all. And so since all those things have it, therefore, in a general couples thing, you could say that for a marriage or a relationship to last really well a long time, they have to mutually have a kind of, well, they may not be enlightened in the sense of fully selfless altruistic beings. Normally people are not, right? I don't pretend to be. But each has to have a commitment to be supporting the other in the effort to restrain that narcissistic or egotistical thing. Do you know what I mean? So that, in other words, rather than we're going to carry on forever where each of us thinks, I'm the greatest and I expect you to agree with me, which when the first in love is happening, maybe it works for a while. But instead of that as the commitment to start with, which will eventually lead to, divorce, Because finally the other one will not agree enough to satisfy the egotist. But rather there's a mutual support in my attempt to be less egotistic. And a recognition of the sort of stress of thinking of someone else as greater than me and better than me. And that there's an inner thing there that isn't quite up to that, but one is working on that. And like in the Book of Changes, it says, the I Ching, it says the relationship has to be based on a mutual spiritual coordination and sort of mutual support. Like I support you in your spiritual quest as an individual, as much as I demand your focus and support of me, that thing. And that be mutual, if you follow me. So I think that's the key. That's our key. Was that fair? Now we hear what you have to say.
That was one of my points.
What?
I said that was one of my points.
Okay, good. All right. I got around to it.
Good. Yeah, that was one of my, I was just going to talk really more from a personal kind of perspective. And that was one of my, I was going to say three things, and one of the things I was going to say, which is, Bob just explained it, is that I think that for a relationship to have the best chance to succeed, if each of the two people share some sort of spiritual unity of some kind. If they do that, then the chances of them having a long relationship is better, because if they come from very different perspectives and have different spiritual affiliations and devotions, then that is not really great, because there's nothing holding them together. But if they actually share some sort of spiritual aspirations, or whatever you want to call it,
yoga,
yeah, then when things become difficult, as they always do, then there is a level in which they can meet, which is beyond the sort of level of just quarrelsome sort of things, There's a level, which is higher than that, which is the spiritual level, that can kind of remain, and that holds them together kind of like a glue.
That has to be the same, like you're thinking that has to be the same spiritual hold. Like the husband and wife has to have the same. Like if somebody's a Buddhist and his partner, her partner is not the Buddhist.
Well, I don't think that you don't need to bring it to that level. I think, within, on the best level with Buddhism and, let's say, Christian level, there are many things that are very, very similar.
Right.
The Dalai Lama always says, brothers and sisters, and all world religions, So I think, it's just, I don't mean it as much as I mean it's equality. That each one of them has a quality within themselves that they aspire to, a transcendence and spiritual understanding and so on and so on. And, what is it? Well, it's transformation. Spiritual development really means transformation of whatever qualities you have. You want to improve them. This is the transformation from this to that. And in however that happens, right? You aspire. But let's be very simple. You aspire maybe to be more loving and more kind, for example, and how to achieve that, right?
And allowing.
I'm just saying, make simple thing out of it.
Yeah.
You're right. So even if something as simple as that, if people share that, their aspirations, their motivation, maybe it's a good word, okay, whatever motivation they have, And if their motivations are different, so let's just say that one inspires to be like that more, and the other one really is more interested in becoming either famous, or wealthy, and spends their energy pursuing that. Do you know what I mean? And then you have two different things going on, rather. Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Rather than going like this religion and that religion, I was thinking it more in terms of both people are having spiritual aspirations, Never mind about the dominations. Right?
Yeah, I agree
This
with
is
that.
what I mean, okay?
Statistically, in the U.S., the highest divorce rate is from the red states, where people are both Baptist or both, Pentecostal, whatever. They have a higher divorce rate than weirdos in San Francisco or New York. They do. So being in the same denomination, even Buddhist divorce also. Buddhist couple
Right.
divorce. So I think the denomination by itself will not be solving the issue. It's the orientation within whichever denomination it is.
But then there was something else I was going to
Oh, good.
maybe share.
Thank you.
Simple, okay, nothing as elucidated. But when I was 24 years old, many years ago, I was married to somebody else, and we went on a honeymoon to India. And the purpose, the honeymoon was to visit with many different spiritual, recognized people and to sort of check them out and see what was going on and, was there something, that we could learn from that or whatever, okay? And so anyhow, we ended up in the Himalayas and there in the foothills of the Himalayas, we went to visit a man called Sri Krishna Prem. He was 94 and I was 24. Originally, Sri Krishna Prem had been British, and like 50 years before that, he'd come to India and he met this woman and she introduced him to the Krishna, Krishna up there, which is a big religious, event in India, the worship of Krishna. He became a devotee of Krishna. And he was living in a tiny little ashram, really, and had a wonderful disciple, and in the foothills there, very quietly. And he was very beautiful and sparkling and amazing, at 94, And he took one look at me and realized that I was unhappy and conflicted and miserable, okay. And so he decided to give me a little bit of advice, okay. So he said, now in life, he said, you can do two things. One is you can live life basically alone, you can have many relationships, but you really basically yourself alone. Or, he said, you can devote yourself to one other person, you know, and then that's what you do, okay? And then you live your life like that. And then he said, now the thing is that which one you're going to do will depend on, you know, your karma in this lifetime and your inclination, you know, your personality, and so on, you know, what you are so most suited for. You know, you're most suited for this or you're most suited for that. But he said the important thing to remember, and this was the point that he wanted to tell me, is that to remember that one is not better or easier than the other. So whether you go this way or whether you go that way, each one has its own difficulties and problems, which is equal to the difficulties and problems and whatever advantages in either case. So then I realized that that was very nice, and I thought about that, and I realized that the person that I was now married to was not the right person to be devoted to, so I went home and got a divorce. But I always sort of remember this particular little piece of advice, because it occurs to me that people often think, you know, when they're alone, you know, oh, if I only had somebody else, and that's the better way of life. Or if they're married and then suddenly, oh my God, I can't stand this, you know, and I've just got to, you know, get away and have my own life, you know. And not that this, you know, keeps people together or not, but it only is important to kind of figure out which is your inclination. You know, what is your inclination is what's important to follow and figure out, and then you do that. And then you know while you're doing that, that's okay, because the other one, you don't need to have any fantasies about the other one is going to be better.
Grass looks always greener on the other
Exactly,
side.
it sort of takes care of that, you know. All right, yeah. And then the only other thing I thought I'd share is from personal experience is that, you know, since we are so, you know, we are habitual creatures, you know, we really like 99.9% habit, you know, we really study ourselves carefully with a magnifying glass, carefully. And we discover that we're very much habit, you know. And so part of that habit also is, you know, being egotistical and self-centered and all of this, you know, we brought up with all of that. And part of that is that when we are with another person, each one of them seeks to dominate the other. You know, it's a kind of a weird thing, you know, I've just seen, you know, but people do, everyone wants to be in charge, you know. And so when you get into a relationship then, you can see it in relationships of people, you know, that you can see easily who's like, some people are very dominant, you know, and the other one is pushed down, you know, and, you know, you do what I say, and so on, and this and that. So only other piece of good advice that I also have is that to make a relationship a function, you do what I call simply take turns, you know. You sort of balance it out by understanding between each other that, okay, I don't really feel like doing that, you know, but, you know, my other half wants to really do that, so I'll go along with that, okay? But then, in return, that other person, my partner, will go along with something that I want to do. So this is how it works out, practically speaking. So that's what I mean about how you can watch the dominance is, does the one person constantly do what the other one wants, or is there a balance?
An exchange.
Yes, and so that's why I'm just calling it, you know, taking turns. And, you know, these are, you know, in between couples, they can have to work out, you know, how that, everyone knows what that balance is. Because in the relationship, you begin to feel oppressed, you know, and then you start getting angry. You start getting annoyed if the balance is off.
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, so that was all.
Thank you. That was good. Thank you.
Thank you. So does people have any questions or things they would like to pursue further? Cynthia, what do you have to
Do you
say?
have anything to say?
Do you have any question or?
I'm thinking.
Thinking.
Okay.
Good. There's a question over there.
Where?
So
Oh yeah.
it's the
Okay.
will and
Why do you think? Yeah.
it's the will and ability to free somebody from suffering. But I guess what I've seen sometimes, people cause their own suffering because they're down a certain path, fueled by ego, fueled by misinformation.
Yes.
Sometimes I don't see them ever able to see a different side of it. They feel wrong. I mean, that's a typical one. You know, I feel wronged from the world for whatever.
The victim.
wrong
The
by the
victim.
world.
It's
Sure.
the victim.
Sure, and I've got to fight against the world to protect this city, society, country, family, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
So even if I have the will to want, to love them and what have you, that viewpoint, I can't change that.
The viewpoint of I feel wrong.
Well, I can't change that other person's viewpoint.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
fundamentally, their
Right.
worldview has to change in order for something else to change.
Sort of. Yes. But what's the question, Frank?
I don't get it either. What is
No,
it?
I'm just trying to understand how love factors and all that. To have.
Well, it's
love
interesting
for
what you say. In the traditional, not so traditional, but in one strand of the meditation on selflessness, on how to control that, how to come to an understanding of the nature of the self, and with the lack of a certain type of self that is like the kind that really causes an imbalance in one's life. The thing to do is to remember and to focus on a time when one has felt that way oneself, wronged. They call it the mood of injured innocence. It's a time when one can perceive how powerfully, viscerally one feels oneself is kind of like the absolute thing. They say, So actually, when people are going around feeling very wronged by the world, they're really on the point of where they're, in a way, asserting themselves the most strongly as they possibly can. But unfortunately, if they don't have the instruction or the reflection, the teaching, that is maybe then something to try to examine what self is it that was wronged. And in a way, shift that instead of blaming outside, take some responsibility themselves about it. That's sort of a big turning point for the person. Because you actually have power over yourself. You don't have power over the rest of the world. Like you're saying, you don't see how you can change that point of view, right? But you can change your point of view always, And that's one thing one can do. But one tends to feel when one gets in a certain stress situation that one absolutely cannot do anything and one feels helpless. So the time of feeling terribly wronged by the world is a time just precursor of despair, because you can't really change the world. You know what I mean? So then that's really bad. That wonderful Thoreau statement, the mass of men today lead lives of quiet desperation. I really like that one. It's really a good one. And it comes, so there's a strange teaching in Buddhism at least about oneself, that when something happens that seems very unjust, one feels very innocently wrong and misperceived. And actually in relationships that often happens, where one member of the couple thinks something terrible about the other, then the other feels like I'm right and that person is wrongly perceiving me. So then the way of gaining power over that situation is not to just insist on one's innocence but to try to see, well, where is it that I do have responsibility in having caused this perception in the other? Even if they're wrong, if somehow there must be something about me that has caused that. So in a way, it's like blame the victim when you are the victim. When you feel victimized, you blame yourself. In the sense of not just because of the blame, but in the sense of that you can do something about that. And there's no need for despair. Now, in dealing with another who's stuck in that sort of situation, of course, it's very difficult what to do. Of course, I guess it's why they say, there are three kinds of gifts, in the virtue of giving, generosity. There's the gift of material things, there's the gift of safety or security or protection, and then there's the gift of teaching. And so I guess all one can do in a situation where people are feeling like that, and you feel that's obstructing them from doing anything positive in the situation, you could just give them something, but then that would just condone their sense of, where you did a little something toward the world treating them right, and might help in some case, but probably they'll still feel you didn't give enough or whatever it is. You can protect them by not attacking them further, or what they would think would be further. But the best, I guess, is teach them. And then when it's an extreme thing, the only way you can teach them is by providing example and not reflecting back to them that you're behaving the same way they are, I guess. It's the only thing you can really do. And it's an odd thing, but maybe someone's therefore very miserable when they feel mistreated by the world. And somehow, very tricky thing of being happy yourself. Even though the world has not treated you absolutely perfectly. And this is something in the whole compassion language that I was trying to get at a little bit before, that to be really compassionate, you have to have a sense of what happiness is. To be loving, you have to have a sense of what happiness is in yourself. So in a way, to be a proper person to contribute in a loving relationship, you have to almost be like what her Krishna Prem guy was saying. You have to be happy in yourself no matter what, even without the relationship. Then you're giving of yourself in the relationship, and you're not depending on the relationship for your happiness or something like that. So when you're encountering someone who's really stuck in this thing of they're really miserable because the world is mistreating them, in one way, the best thing you can do for them is just be really cheery yourself. I'm so sorry. Which might even annoy them more. But in another way, it puts the burden on them. Like, you're cheered up, and I didn't do anything to you, but they might think you are, or you're not being miserable with me, they might think. And then you'd say, well, I won't do you any good. And you can cheer up yourself, It's like it shows a faith in them that they're not that bad off, or something like that. Maybe that gives them encouragement to try to be less bad off, or less feeling the victim. I don't know, it's a complicated thing, Unfortunately, when people feel really wronged by the world, when people feel despair, they tend to become violent. Is the problem. The best thing to do with that kind of situation is avoid them.
Well, that's why I was more asking based on our conversation earlier about more like Wahhabi and third world and things. I mean, there are groups of people that just feel that the world has wronged them, and it's very hard to. Yeah.
Well, I actually have a very odd view. I was doing an interview with someone in Belgium, but who was doing the interview for a Dutch radio or TV thing. And the Dutch are very happy. The Dutch always win the world happiness competition. But they lost this year to the Danish, because I think they held a regressive government for temporarily, I don't know. But the Dutch and the Danish are constantly competing for the happiest. Bhutan is no longer the happiest, even though they have the concept of gross national happiness, which was influential in creating a new style, a new science in a way, in sociology and anthropology of people, scientifically trying to study like what makes people happy and not, and then in terms of nations, where is there greater happiness and not greater happiness. And somehow Dutch and Danish really are into it. I don't know why. And these are technical things. They aren't just impressionistic. They have polls and ways of really studying this. And so I'm doing that. And then, she lived in Belgium, this person. So then Belgium is really worried, all the European countries are, in the US, of these young, unemployed Muslim men or otherwise unhappy Muslim men who go and join the ISIS. Hundreds of them. And they're really worried, what do we do when they come back? And I cannot understand that problem. So I was telling her quite gratuitously, and I confess it was. I said, why is that a problem? The point is, if they decide to go join the Caliphate, they should be getting Caliphate passports. They don't need to keep their Belgian passport or their German or their French passport. Therefore, they don't necessarily get to come back, if you follow me. Then that's not a problem, although there will be a problem if the Caliphate attacks Germany or Belgium. But to allow them to keep their passport when they've decided that they're joining a self-proclaimed country that hates all other countries and wants to destroy them, Anybody who wants to do that is welcome. But they should stay there.
They can't come back.
No, they should. Well, not with their
They
passport.
should be able
I mean, they
to
can
come
apply. They can apply.
Say,
And then you'd have to evaluate whether they're coming back to blow you up or they're really sick of it and they've decided that was a mistake. But, that they automatically come back just because they had your passport before should be no wrong.
Yeah, should be negated.
In other words, hey guys, you're going to go fight for ISIS?
And then you give it up.
Ask the caliph for a passport if you want to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's what I have to say. So I was telling him, he was like, looking at me like, I wasn't asking that question. I said, well, I'm hoping you will tell somebody in the coffee shop maybe who works for the ministry. I told her.
Any other questions?
I know that's off the topic. I realize that. Yes.
I sometimes walk around in the streets and see things that are
You walk down the street and what?
And see things.
around streets,
Yeah.
in different countries, different cities, and I see a lot of sadness and a lot of cruelty and a lot of sad situations, and I want to help, and I give money and I try and make things more positive, but sometimes you just get overwhelmed, and after a while I choose another route, so I avoid beggars or I'll avoid a situation that will just destroy me for the rest of the day. Because I see it and I can't not think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you avoid it, if you tell them to go live in another country, you don't see it, but it's there, and then you're not doing anything about it, and that makes you just as crazy. So I would love to be able to keep working on spreading happiness or alleviating cruelty, but I get so worn away. I'm not able to stand it as much as some people, I guess. And I don't know how the Dalai Lama walks around and always, he seems like he's kind of calm and in control, and he's spreading a feeling, a sense that's really useful. But if you can't handle it, how do you handle it?
So she feels personally overwhelmed,
Yes.
by her suffering.
Yes.
And, and how do you handle that?
I know. Well,
And she used the Dalai Lama as an example of the opposite.
you have someone who's not overwhelmed.
Is he?
Yes.
He's probably overwhelmed.
Well, I think the reason I think Dalai Lama is somewhat overwhelmed actually by the magnitude of the suffering. He certainly is overwhelmed by the suffering being inflicted on his people. And he gets overwhelmed. He's cried.
We've seen him cry.
Yeah, we've seen him cry about it and so on. But the reason he can keep going, I think, and never despairs, is because he finds some kind of well of happiness within himself. And he tries not to fasten or focus only on that suffering, because, as I said again, it's like the compassion thing. It's not just being attuned to the suffering that you see. It's having a sense that there is an alternative, and even seeing in the worst case some kind of inner light in that being, that they can come out of it, and it could be even in another life. You see, the materialist ideology is a very distorted one, actually, meaning that people are just their bodies, and they have no souls, and therefore they have no future life and no past life. It's a very imprisoning worldview and very unrealistic, actually, from a Buddhist point of view, or any point of view, a scientific point of view, because it means that it's based on a distorted idea that something can become from nothing, or that something can become nothing, which is completely unrealistic. Even the materialist scientists have a law of thermodynamics that says since energy is never destroyed, it only changes form. And, it's a causal chain, And life is like that, and not only the physical life, but mental life is like that. So somewhere in this great ocean of suffering beings, which Buddha also saw, and he said the recognition of it is a very important step. But then if you look into the cause of that, and then you realize that the reality of it is not that. then you don't get despairing somehow, and you find an inner happiness in yourself, and then you don't have to be dragged into every kind of suffering. So the one thing you mentioned about giving something to someone who would seem very needy, and then feeling overwhelmed because you couldn't give to everybody, actually, there's another angle on that sort of thing, which I like to say. Like, I have a habit, I don't give that much to all this, but I try to give when I can. And I enjoy when I manage to give, because it's a little bit of a feeling of relief and release when you give something, whether it's useful or not, whether it's the right gift or not. And sometimes I have a thing when I come back from my classroom in Columbia, and I'm walking down Broadway, and there's different panhandlers on Broadway nowadays. And, some of them, I know a couple of guys, they're going to definitely go and buy crack. I can tell, but they say they're hungry. But I like to give them something, and I'm almost happy to see them. It gives me a chance to give something if I have. If I don't have anything, I say I don't have anything. But if I do, I have the kind of thing, the first thing comes out of my pocket, I give them. So sometimes it's like a $5 bill, a $10 bill. I happen to have that. I didn't pre-think it, I'm going down Broadway, I better make sure I only have a single. Sometimes I have a 5 or 10, and I have been known to do that. And I kind of enjoy it when I trick myself into doing that. But I have been with colleagues who get actually angry, and they say, you couldn't give $10 to every one of these people, and what are they going to do with it anyway? And I said, well, excuse me, but every one of them isn't the one in front of me, A. And B, giving means whatever they do, and I kind of enjoy the opportunity to give it. And then they were completely bollocks by that. They can't deal with it. This friend of mine, Protestant, nice Protestant guy. But I think that there's somehow, that's your own joy if you want to give something. And if you don't, well, you don't, because for some reason, you have an instinct that it's not right for that person, or you don't actually have enough at that time, or that's all right too. But, the giving thing is more for the giver. It's much for the giver if they really give.
There's other things.
As it is for the recipient.
That is so more of an answer, okay?
What?
I said that is more of an answer. That the giving is really more for the giver, okay?
Well, it may be. I mean, I actually am talking more about like animals who are, they don't have any choices. So if I go past a homeless person who's got a dog that's shivering,
I've done that.
I will bring it a blanket. I will give it a shirt, something to keep it warm. Because I just can't walk away and think of the dog shivering. So I try.
But you can walk away, though. You do walk away.
I walk away after I give him the blanket. But there's a million more dogs.
Because you're wearing a shirt. Otherwise, you'd be shirtless.
Oh, I've been shirtless.
I wear layers when I go out.
So you look happy to me, actually.
I'm happy, but
yeah,
but when I think about it,
I'm about it. So be happy.
But the point is, you're being too hard on yourself.
Yeah.
I think, you have to be, remember what we said, that you have to, have love yourself, and, love yourself. You're being too hard on yourself, The point is, you can only, do this much, And then you don't have to be, unhappy about all the things that you can't do. I mean, it's a giant world.
Yeah, the Bill Murray baby steps things is a great thing. Do you think you're going to have a future life after you die in this body? Do you think so?
Well, I liked when you said that.
What?
She likes the idea, but you said it.
No,
well, you know what? You can read stuff like the near-death experience people. You can read different Buddhist stories about people going over a sequence of lives, what they call the former life stories. You can read the Stevenson literature about children who remember their previous lives. There's a lot of evidence that we go on life after life, actually. And so, you give a quarter to somebody in a good mood, and it goes with a good mood without feeling contempt for them or worry about what they can do with that quarter or anything. Just give it and feeling good. And that little piece of opening in yourself, then given the infinity of time awaiting you to exist in many different future bodies, that becomes an ocean of wealth and generosity and joy. And in baby step, you can see in that tiny gesture an infinity of positivity, let's say. And eventually it will overwhelm the misery that's out there. And temporarily, if you look out there and say, oh, I can't give a report to everybody, then you will feel overwhelmed. Right? But you do one baby step thing in a positive direction, even tiny, even a penny, and you feel so much better. And they will, and if it's done with a certain thing, even they'll be happy. Although I've had beggars like toss the penny back at me, like, who needs to
That's not enough.
That's a funny one.
That's not enough.
That's a funny
It's
one.
kind of like that.
So anyway.
Dog they got, like,
Anyhow.
make them
Anyway, that's good. So that I like that line of thought. That's very, very
You
good.
just do your, I think everyone should just do their best, whatever that is.
Yes, that's what Dalai Lama says.
But don't, make, there's this whole thing about, victimization and being a perfectionist. This is all crazy making stuff.
It is. I'm Buddhist. No,
Well, so
that
you
works
have
that
to
way.
try to
Yeah.
balance
I
things
like
out
the,
within
I like
yourself.
the idea of like the people, the dogs coming back as
Right.
the masters next time. That makes me feel
But
better.
that happens.
I'm sure it does.
Now, what's that cute thing?
What?
What was that little thing about the person, who saw, the man, he was married to his enemy or his. Remember what was that?
that's
one? Quickly.
that's an
give her that
incredible
one.
thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
About that's a famous story that is taught about karma, where Maudgalyayana, who was a disciple of the Buddha, who had a special clairvoyance, he was very clairvoyant about people's previous lives, this and that, and he went out for his alms round, as they call it, for lunch in the late morning, and he came back to the community, to the group, and he was going, alas, alas, eating his father, beating his mother, and embracing his enemy. The samsara is really hopeless. And then they said, well, what do you mean, Margaret? Why are you so upset? He said, well, I went to this house where this man was living, and he was eating a piece of fish. And he was from a fisherman's clan, and the fish was the reincarnation of his father. And then he had a dog there who was whining and wanted fish, and he was whacking it to get rid of it. The dog was the reincarnation of his mother. And then he had a child that he was like cuddling as he was eating, and the child was the reincarnation of his worst enemy, who was going to be born there to really get vengeance on him. And he was saying samsara is just so warped and so crazy, it's really difficult. And they tell a story like that. And they use that story to illustrate how we should try to love everybody, actually. Even the ones we quote-unquote love, and the ones that we quote-unquote don't like. And we should equally love all of them, really. Because an enemy was our mother in a previous life, our mother in this life was an enemy in a previous life, and the point is all of them are potentially mothers, or we could make enemies of all of them if we behave like stupidly enough. And so, therefore, we should just love everyone. That's the most sensible thing. Sharon Salzberg and I wrote this book, Love Your Enemies, which I dared to take that title because after seeing a film called what was it called?
Never mind.
It doesn't matter. It was a film about a black choir competing to win a choir contest in singing Amazing Grace, in Atlanta, they were from some little place in Alabama or something. And they had some people who were like preventing them from having the good singers in the group. It was the whole thing, and it was a very early Beyonce movie. It was well acted. And that was a delightful movie, really was. And it was had a lot of that kind of choir, that lively singing, and almost like rock and roll, but actually like a choir thing. And then in the end, there was a sermon in the church that finally came out with a happy ending. It was a comedy. And in front of the thing, they had a billboard, they put the title of a sermon on the front of the church, in the thing in the country, you've seen that. And it said, love your enemies. And then the something was, because it will drive them crazy. I really like that. But I didn't use the second part. I chickened out. Because I thought some Christians might be offended by Buddhist writing like that. So I said, love your enemies, and I forgot why. And then you'll all be happier. But actually, the love your enemies is a very practical advice. Because on the most simplistic level, why is your enemy your enemy? because the enemy thinks that you stand between them and their happiness. Therefore, they're your enemy. Because your enemy wants to be happy too. Everybody wants to be happy, right? So if you love them means want them to be happy. So if they were happy without getting you out of their way, they would no longer be your enemy. You would no longer be an obstacle to their happiness if they had happiness without bugging you. So want your enemies to be happy. That's why I say, when they want to go join ISIS, go, man, join ISIS. And, work havoc on your own. And then be happy on your own and don't come back.
This video was brought to you in part through the generous support of Tibet House US membership community and viewers like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit tibethouse.us. Thanks for watching. Tashi Delek.